Back in 2008, the entire global financial system almost completely imploded. Now, a lot of people, especially if you're a bit younger, you probably think you know the story of the Lehman Shock. But the real story isn't just about one bank going bust. It's about uncovering a system, a hidden dark structure that was practically built to fail. So let's pull back the curtain and see what was really going on.
So, was it all just because some folks couldn't pay their mortgages? I mean, that's the simple story we always hear. But honestly, that's like saying a massive forest fire was just about a single lit match. The real problem was that the entire forest was already soaked in gasoline.
Because underneath it all, there was this hidden system, a maze of financial engineering and completely warped incentives. It was a structure that took individual, everyday debts and wove them into a global web of risk. And today, we're going to be the detectives. We're going to uncover how it was built, piece by painful piece.
All right, so let's start our investigation with the raw material, the very foundation of this entire shaky structure, something called a subprime loan. This is ground zero.
So you hear the term subprime, and you think, well, not prime. And you'd be right. These were home loans given to people with shaky credit histories, the folks most likely to struggle with making payments. So you gotta ask, right? Why on earth would banks lend massive amounts of money to people who probably couldn't pay it back? It just doesn't make sense on the surface. Or does it?
Well, to get why, you have to look at the vibe at the time. In the early 2000s, it was a perfect storm. You had government policy pushing homeownership for everyone, super low interest rates making money feel almost free, and most importantly, house prices just kept going up and up and up. This created this powerful illusion that housing was a totally risk-free, can't-lose bet. For the lenders, the thinking was ridiculously simple. Who cares if the borrower defaults? We'll just take the house and flip it for a profit. Easy money, right?
But look, that logic alone doesn't trigger a global meltdown. For that, Wall Street needed a machine, a high-speed money-making machine that could take these risky little loans and just multiply them on an industrial scale.
And the name of that machine was securitization. This is a super important idea. Think about it. Instead of holding on to a risky 30-year loan and hoping for the best, what if you could just package it up with thousands of others, turn it into a shiny new product, and sell it to someone else? Well, that's exactly what they did. And this created this incredibly powerful and really dangerous feedback loop. This cycle was the engine of the whole crisis. A bank makes a risky loan, immediately bundles it into what's called a mortgage-backed security, or MBS, and boom, sells it. Just like that, the bank has its cash back, has zero risk, and is ready to do it all over again. It was a high-speed game of lend, sell, repeat.
And here's the absolute heart of the problem. The people making the loans had no skin in the game. None. Their only job was to crank out more and more loans, no matter how bad they were, because the risk got passed down the line like a hot potato. The most fundamental rule of lending, making sure the borrower can actually pay you back, was just completely thrown out the window.
Okay, but selling giant bundles of obviously risky loans isn't exactly easy. So Wall Street had to get even more creative. They added another, even more complicated layer to the machine, one designed to make all that risk just disappear, or at least seem to disappear.
And that's where the CDO comes in, the collateralized debt obligation. Now, if an MBS was like a fruit salad of different mortgages all mixed together, a CDO was like taking hundreds of those fruit salads and throwing them into a blender. They took tiny slices from all these different mortgage bundles and repackaged them again. It created a product so ridiculously complex, almost nobody, and I mean nobody, knew what was actually inside. And this is where you see the deception in plain sight. The sales pitch to investors was, oh, this is a sophisticated way to manage risk, by slicing it up into safe little pieces. But what was really happening? They were just taking financial garbage, blending it up, and calling it gold. So how did they get away with it? How did they sell this stuff? Well, they got the official stamp of approval from the market's supposed referees, the credit rating agencies. These guys gave a ton of these CDOs a AAA rating. That's the highest seal of safety you can get, the same rating as US government debt. But here's the catch, the fatal flaw. The agencies were being paid by the very same banks that were creating these toxic products. It was a massive, blatant conflict of interest. They had every reason to just hand out good grades. So now we've got our toxic product, and it's cleverly disguised as a super safe investment. But for this whole structure to become a true global catastrophe, it needed one last step.
It had to go worldwide.
And that is exactly what happened. All over the world, pension funds in Europe, banks in Asia, regular investors, they saw that AAA rating and they bought in. So a risky home loan given to someone in, say, Florida was no longer just Florida's problem. Nope. That risk was now sitting quietly on the books of a retirement fund in Norway, and they had no idea.
So there you have it, the whole chain of contagion, laid out. You start with a local housing bubble in the US. You turn those risky loans into these complex alphabet soup products, the MBSs and CDOs. Then you slap a fake safe label on them. And finally, you sell them all over the globe until nobody, not even the people who made them, knew where the ticking time bombs were hidden. The entire system was one big black box.
Look, a system built on a house of cards literally can't last forever. Sooner or later, reality is going to come knocking. And when it did, the whole thing fell apart, leaving behind a perfect blueprint for how modern financial crises work.
And the trigger was incredibly simple. In 2006, U.S. house prices just stopped going up. Then they started to fall. And in that moment, the entire logic of the system, that whole we can just sell the house for a profit idea, it completely evaporated. As people started defaulting, the houses were suddenly worth less than the loans. And just like that, the toxic junk inside all those financial products was exposed for what it was, worthless.
So, why do we always talk about Lehman Brothers? Well, they were neck deep in this stuff. But their failure wasn't the cause of the crisis. It was the tipping point. See, all the big banks were lending to each other, all the time, using these same toxic CDOs as bargaining chips. When Lehman went down, it was like a switch flipped. Nobody knew who else was holding the garbage. Trust, the absolute lifeblood of the financial system, just vanished. Overnight.
So what are the big lessons here? What's the takeaway from this whole mess? Well, this blueprint shows us a few things, loud and clear. It shows that tiny risks, when you bundle them up and structure them, can become absolutely enormous. It proves that all that financial wizardry is often just a way to hide risk, not get rid of it. And it's a brutal reminder that when you get the incentives this wrong, you can drive an entire system straight off a cliff.
And that's really the most important thing to get. The 2008 crash isn't just some dusty old story from the history books. It left us with a pattern, a blueprint, that shows us exactly how these things happen, how the hype builds, how the risk gets hidden, and how it all comes crashing down.
Which brings us to the final and most crucial question. We've just walked through the 2008 blueprint, the complex products, the hype, the hidden risks connecting everything. So my question to you is, where do you see that exact same blueprint being used today? Think about it.